Salve. Today we're looking at Carmen 51. This poem is when Catullus sees Lesbia for the very first time. He sees her speaking to another man, and he's very jealous of this man because he wants to be the one to speak with her. It's love at first sight. And so Catullus gives us all of the information that's going on in his mind, the feelings that he has in his body as he gazes upon her for the very first time. This poem mimics the style of a poem by Sappho, Catullus's great hero. And so fittingly, we use the Sapphic meter. This is the only time we're going to be using this meter, which is a good thing because it can be a little confusing. Much like the hendecasyllabic that we just finished with, the first 3 lines also have 11 syllables. They're not in the same arrangement as the syllables in hendecasyllabic. And then the 4th line in the Sapphic meter is a half a line. It's got 5 syllables. Lines 1 through 3 are going to look the same. So what I really want to highlight is the 5th can be either a short or a long. If you were to Google search, you'll most likely find that it's always a long, but Catullus will make it a short sometimes. Line 4 is a half a line. Bum 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 bum. This poem is in 16 lines, but because Sapphic meter breaks it into 4-line intervals, 4-line stanzas, we're just going to take each stanza as it is by itself, which might cause small problems later because each stanza isn't really its own thing. It's not an island unto itself. They refer back to other stanzas, but I think we'll be able to figure this one out. First, we apply the meter, which you've done in your own time. Shows the sound something like this. Ille mi par esse Deo videtur, ille si facest superare divos, qui sedens adversus identitem te spectatet audet. The first thing that we always need to do is identify our nouns and our verbs, our pronouns and things like that, and just so we can have a better understanding of how this poem goes together. This is something that we did in class, and so we got something that looked like this. All right, let's take a look at our notes. Ille normally means that, but here it means he. We use it alone. That's fine. That's not a problem. We can maybe if you want to keep it like that, we can say that guy. Videtur, the verb in the first line, in passive, remember it means to appear, it doesn't mean to be seen. Maybe it means to be seen as something. We have si facest in the second line. Since we have Deo and Divos here, we don't want to offend the gods, obviously. Divos is an adjective, but it's being used as a noun. That's fine. And te is pulling double duty here. It's both the object of the preposition adversus and the object of the verb spectatet audet. There's a couple more things that you might be helpful for you to know before you begin. Videtur here actually goes with the governs these two verbs esse and superare in line 2. So that guy, he seems to be something, and he seems to surpass something. So using our notes over here, our vocabulary over here, this extra note that I've given you, the governing of the esse of the 2 infinitives, and our identification of what these nouns and these verbs are, pause the video now and see what you can make out of these 4 lines. Ille mi par esse Deo videtur, we can take as one line. That guy, to me, equal to be to a god he seems, right? That guy seems to be equal to a god to me. In line 2, we find out more of what this guy seems to be. That guy, if it is proper, if it's divinely allowable to say, appears or seems to surpass the gods. Quiz relative pronoun. What did you identify the antecedent of that being? You might have thought that it might have been Dios because that's normally how antecedents work. They're the things right before it. But it wouldn't make sense here anyway because sedens and spectat and audet are all singular anyway. So it must refer back to ille, that guy, who, sedens, sitting across from you again and again, watches and hears you. Remember that te did double duty. It did from you, from adversus, and you as the object of spectata naudet. Okay. Having applied the Sapphic meter in your own time, you should have had something that sounds like this. Dulce ridentem misero, quad omnis repit sensus mihi, nam simul te lesbiad spexi nihil est super me vocis in ore. You were asked to identify these nouns, and so you should have had something that looked like this. You might have identified lesbia as a nominative, and I might not have caught it in class. So lesbia actually is an vocative. He's speaking to her. Right, first that quad, as we see in the notes, the antecedent of this relative pronoun quad is all the stuff that comes before it. Stylistically, this is really interesting. Take a look at what he does here. He takes the word misero and mihi, which grammatically go together, and he puts them in different lines, pretty far away from each other. He also takes omnis and sensus, which also grammatically go together, and he splits those up as well. We have this crossing of misero, omnis, sensus, mihi. We have this crossing going on here where you see this X going on here. This is something called chiasmus. Chiasmus comes from the Greek letter chi, which looks like an X because it does this. It's kind of neat. It's this ABBA pattern. Knowing all of this, why don't you pause the video now and see what you can make of these 4 lines. Welcome back. How'd you do? So unlike last time, we have to do 5 and 6. We can't really take 5 and 6 apart because of this chiasmus going on here. So we have dulce ridentitem, which clearly is, sweetly laughing, which, that should have been read. Quad, which, a thing which, right? All this stuff, him being close to her and hearing her laughing, on line 4, sees you and hears you sweetly laughing. A situation which Euripit snatches away from miserable me, from wretched me, all senses. 4, as soon as, lesbia, I saw you, nihil, nothing, super est, nothing is left, nothing remains to me, it's a dative, of voice in my mouth, which is a fancy way of saying I can't speak. This was a little bit harder, a little trickier, because we can't split up these datives, nor can we we can't split up this sentiment and this idea the same way that they can in Latin. Lines 9 through 12, since you already applied the meter, you should have had something that sounds like lingua sed torpet tenuis sub artus flammade manat soni tu suote tintinant aures gemina teguntor lumina nocte. Okay. You've already identified the nouns and the pronouns, and you got something that looked like this. All right. Look at all this vocabulary over here. There's a certain thing. The rest of this is okay. There's one thing to note here. The word lumen in line 12 has a very special meaning. Normally it means light or lamp. Here he means your eyes. This is a fancy thing that we're going to talk about later called metonymy. It's pretty easy. We have a noun and a verb, or rather we have a nominative and a verb, and a nominative and a verb, and a nominative and a verb, and a couple of ablatives kind of doing their own thing in here. There is one thing here, tenuis and flamma, those do go together. It goes with flamma, a thin flame. Down at the bottom, gemina and nocte, those are 2 ablatives that go together. Again, he's kind of splitting things up in a way that we can't do it in English. Knowing all of this, take a moment, pause the video, and see what you can do with these 4 lines. They're fairly easy. Welcome back. How'd you do? Pretty. Lingua sed torpet, but my tongue is numb. And then the next, we have tenuis sub artis flamma de manat. We have a thin flame flows down beneath my limbs. 22 suape tintinarares, we have my ears, or rather ears are ringing with their own sound, or those ablatives. And then last but not least, gemina teguntur lumina nocte. We have gemina, which is, I told you that lumen goes with, lumen here is to replace eyes, and you know that geminus means twin, and you would think that gemina would go with your eyes since you have two eyes, but look, it is an ablative. It in fact goes with nocte. It's not your twin eyes, it in fact is twin night. Oh, poetry. My eyes are covered with twin night. Okay. These are all the physical manifestations of love within Catullus. His tongue is numb. That makes sense. We can understand that. A thin flame flows beneath my limbs. What is he feeling there? His ears are ringing. That makes sense. But last but not least, my eyes are covered with twin night. We'll talk about this poetic device when in class. It's actually really interesting what's going on here. All right, last 4 lines. And since we're shifting the last 4 lines, we are shifting the attention away from talking to Lesbia. Now Catullus is chastising himself for feeling the way he is feeling. He's trying to rationalize what's going on within himself. So you can see he's addressing himself, Catulle. So applying the meter to it, you should have something that sounds like this. O tium Catulle tibi molestes. O tiex sultas nimiumque gestis. O tiet reges prioset beatas perditet orbes. Having identified the nouns, you have something that looks like this. Otium, notice it is a neuter, right? These neuters can be really tricky if you're not looking out for them. So if you saw this and you first immediately said, oh, well, that's accusative, well, that's a good gut feeling, but as we start to know more and more, you have to second guess yourself, which is why the vocab is over here for you. So you can look at things like that. Otium Catulle tibi molestum est. Okay, that's actually a pretty good, easy first line. Otio, now we turned it from a nominative, now we have an ablative phrase here. Exultas nimium gestis. Notice who's the verb? He's talking to himself. So what form are these verbs in? And then we have the nominative again. Otium now is back to being the subject. Odium is the thing that perdidit both reges and beatus urbes. Okay, so the only note here is that beatus and urbes go together. They're circling around the verb perdidit. So pause the video now and see what you can make out of this. It's fairly straightforward. All right, line 13, pretty easy. Odium Catulle tibi molestum est. Leisure, Catullus, is troublesome to you. Otio exultas nimiumque gestis. With leisure or by leisure, right? We have an ablative phrase, but he's talking to himself. So you rejoice in leisure, and you are elated, and you delight too much. Oh, see, he's saying idle hands are the devil's playground, right? If you had some work to do, then you wouldn't be thinking these thoughts. Otium et reges prius et beatus perdita urbes. So otium, it destroys 2 things. It et reges et beatus. Leisure previously, beforehand, in the past, has ruined both kings and blessed cities. And that is Carmen 51. I hope you didn't have too much problems with this. Looking at all 4 stanzas, I actually think probably the hardest one was stanza 2, or at least parts of stanza 2. For the rest of it, stanza 3 and stanza 4, I hope you didn't have any problems with this. It's really straightforward here. Stanza 2 is the one that had all the chiasmus going on and the separation of stuff. So other than that, it should have been pretty easy. All right, so make sure to go back and to take a look at your translation, how it matched with mine. If you're feeling in a poetic mood, you could try to make it into something that sounds good in English. Right? This is what it means in Latin. How can you make it poetic in English? I think I rambled long enough. I'll see you in class. Voila.